the new Nexus really did end up being styled after the 2014 Moto 10. In fact, if it weren't for its size and the giant, vertical Nexus logo on the back, we'd have a hard time telling it apart from Motorola's latest flagship. The front is differentiated from the Note 4 by its more rounded, soap-shaped form, its two-speaker grills on the top and bottom bezels, and, of course, the lack of a physical home button. At the back, we've got a matted plastic shell that curves to the sides, while Samsung has gone for a fairly convincing, but ultimately fake plastic imitation of leather. To the sides, we've got a small and welcome surprise with the Nexus 6 dash, and like most manufacturers, Samsung and its Note 4 included, Google's Bubble. It houses both a power key and volume rocker low on the right side of the frame, making them easy to reach and manipulate. If any of you were hoping that, despite the insistent rumors, Google will nevertheless keep its cool and stick to a conventional, battery-sparing 1080p display, you might not appreciate the fact that the company is transitioning to a Quad HD one. Indeed, the 5.96-inch panel boasts a super sharp resolution of 1440 x 2560 pixels, good enough for 493 pixels per inch. But that's not all. The screen we're looking at is a VAMOLED type, and those are fairly rare with manufacturers other than Samsung. Speaking of the Note 4's maker, it has fitted a 5.7-inch Super AMOLED screen with an identical Quad HD resolution or 515p. For protection, both devices are making use of a Gorilla Glass 3 cover, which is harder to scratch and more resistant to shattering than conventional glass, all the while providing lower levels of reflectance in order to aid outdoor visibility. Perhaps with the exception of price, a non-factor here, the fact that the Nexus line runs on the very latest, manufacturer bloat-free versions of Android was one of the family's definitive highlights. This does not change with the Nexus 6, which will be among the very first devices on the planet to offer the latest version of Android 5.0 Lollipop out of the box. One of the key changes with Lollipop is the transition towards a flatter, but animation-rich visuals that feel almost playful in that subtle Google style, and also provide a much-needed sense of fluidity to actions. Lollipop also brings notable improvements to the way you interact with notifications, and how they are served. You can now action them straight from the lock screen, for example. As part of the so-called Project Volta, Google is also introducing enhancement to battery life, so small to moderate savings are expected, not to mention that Android now finally has a dedicated power-saving. With both devices sporting as high-resolution displays, we're glad to see that the Google-Motorola duo, like Samsung, has gone for a quad-core Qualcomm Snapdragon 805 chipset. Capable of cranking up the clock speeds to up to 2.7 GHz when needed, this is the first processor from the chip maker specifically marketed as capable of pushing such mind-blowing amounts of pixels. Both devices also make use of an Adreno 420 GPU, which has seen generational performance improvements over its predecessor, along with a few new features, like hardware tessellation. Team Motorola fitted a 13-megapixel, 3.06 Sony IMX214X Mirror sensor 1.12 micron pixels inside the Nexus 6, complete with optical image stabilization. The unit is also complemented by 6-element, f2.0 lens and an unusual ring flash that surrounds it, with 2 LEDs inside. Up at the front, we've got a 2-megapixel selfie snapper, capable of 720p capture for the occasional video chat. With the Note 4, we're talking a 16-megapixel, 2.6 sensor 1.1 micron pixels, also garnished with optical image stabilization. The snapper has an equally wide, f2.0 lens, but comes with a more standard, single LED flash. For the front-facing slot, Samsung chose a very generous, 3.7-megapixel camera that can do 1080p video. In terms of video, both devices can do 1080p at 30 fps, though the Note 4 can shoot super smooth, 60 fps 1080p clips also, and super high-res 4K UHD, also at 30 frames per second. Unlike the Nexus 6, the Note 4 can also capture slow-motion videos. Obviously, the Nexus 6 is yet to reach our hands, so we don't yet know what kind of results to expect from its camera, but we do know that the Note 4 is currently one of the most capable smartphone shooters on the market, whether we're talking stills or video. We do, however, have to point out that the former two Nexus flagships were lackluster in comparison with the best flagships that were on the market at that time, but we'll still have to wait and see if that remains the case with the Nexus 6.